Welcome to Garden America, right here on Facebook Live. This is our podcast, and it is part 2. Last week we talked about drip irrigation. This week, Tiger, what's our topic as we continue our series?
So we're talking pop-up sprinklers or overhead sprinklers. So, these are sprinklers that are connected to a PVC pipe system. Normally people use them in a lawn or flower bed. They'll come in a little canister. When you turn it on, it pops up and has a spray head on the top of it. And that's the way that, primarily a lot of people water their yards is with pop-up sprinklers.
Now, let's go back and talk about the progression of pop-up sprinklers, drip irrigation, all this, maybe 30 years ago compared to where we are now, because you've been doing this a long time.
Yeah, well, pop-up sprinklers were one of the initial ways that everybody watered their lawns. Back before the modern pop-up sprinkler that we have now, they had those ticking sprinklers. I don't know what you would call them.
I got it.
Exactly.
I used to do that in school. That's I got sent to the principal's office.
They used to just call those rainbirds, didn't they?
Did they? Is that what they called them? Was rainbirds?
Well, rainbird was a product name,
It's a
right?
pulsating sprinkler.
Yeah.
But I think, Rainbird makes all kinds of irrigation equipment, but back then we used to just call them, Rainbird.
Yeah, we had those. I remember as a kid, that was the way it's supposed to, get the entire lawn.
Yeah.
And you know what, though, back then, we wasted a lot of water.
Well, no, those actually served a real good purpose, because the whole tut tut tut, it's because another piece was hitting it, which would cause a mist. So it would hit where the base of the sprinkler was, but it would also be shooting out 8, 10, 12 feet away from the sprinkler as well, where the modern pop-up sprinkler comes out more like a fan, and at the base of the sprinkler itself actually doesn't get a lot of water at all. So those rainbirds, old school rainbirds, were actually to some extent more efficient than the modern sprinkler that we had now, which, but not even getting into the, advanced modern sprinkler. We're getting into the low flow sprinkler heads. I'll talk about those as well.
Well, I guess what I mean is, depending upon how you set it up, a lot of people would be watering their sidewalk at the same time.
Yeah.
Obviously, yes, it did a good job, but people were sloppy.
Yes.
And where irrigation nowadays, you can be precise.
Really precise. Exactly. And, to your question about, drip and soaker tubing and pop-up sprinklers, the progression, I feel drip soaker lines, they came about to be more efficient, to not waste water. So areas that, they didn't have water concerns, these were products that were introduced for those areas. But anywhere where water is not of a concern, when you travel across the country, anywhere where water is not a concern, in Portland, they don't even have sprinklers in their lawns.
They don't need to because it rains so much.
No, they exactly. Their lawn does brown out a little bit in the summertime if they don't hand water it, but they don't put sprinkler systems in their lawns even because they get so much rain.
Now let's catch people up if you haven't been following on. John has a little dilemma. I'm not sure he settled that dilemma yet with his new home.
Right.
What he's putting into
water,
place.
How he's going to water.
Now explain the differences between what John has a choice of in terms of putting in a system.
Well, one of the big areas where John has concern is a slope. He's got a slope in his yard that he needs to irrigate. So does he use a soaker tube system like Netafim running all through the slope to water the plants on this bank? Or is he going to use pop-up sprinklers that, come on, water the bank, but if he waters too much, it'll start running down the bank
and will not
erosion,
soak into where he wants it.
Sure. And you're actually wasting. Good example is those people that have a sloped front yard. They throw on their sprinklers, and after 2 minutes, it's running down the sidewalk.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about, how to, avoid that today in this podcast.
Okay.
Those totally off the subject, not totally off the subject, but you were talking about kind of the history of sprinklers, and the original pop-ups were all brass. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
The piping.
Yeah.
Before it was PVC, it was galvanized piping.
Right.
Can you imagine having to work with that, putting in a new irrigation system?
That's like piping in older houses, older homes now too. Well, the old copper piping.
Yeah.
And so things have come a long way. So what's your advice, Tiger? Let's
start off on this problem that people have, where they have a sloped bed. Whether it's a hillside or whether it's in their front yard and they have a sloped lawn, and they have standard pop-up sprinklers in this lawn or this bed. Okay. Well, if you throw on a standard sprinkler that's shooting out about 2 to 3 gallons per hour of water, when you run this for 3 or 4 minutes, the soil is now saturated at the top and it starts running down the slope, right? So all the water that now after that 3-minute mark, you're only getting maybe about 25% absorption. The rest of it is just running down the street or running to the bottom of the hill, and you're not getting absorption into that hillside. So now you're running it for 10 minutes. You're wasting 7 minutes of water. Okay. So how do we avoid that? If you don't want to change all the sprinkler heads, now I'm not talking about changing the pop-up. The pop-up itself is in the ground. It's that little canister. It's got the stem that sticks up when you turn on the system. The head is just at the top of that. It's just simply unscrewing it, screwing on a new one. That's a simple thing. That a standard pop-up sprinkler runs $2 to $3 each. A more advanced one, like an MP rotator or more precision sprinklers, they run $10 each.
Now those things can break too, where eventually they don't pop up; they get
Correct.
stuck.
Yeah, they get stuck with debris and things like that. The spring in there fails. But so let's just say you had that and you didn't want to replace the heads. What you can do is what we call is delayed or modified start time, where you figure out when it starts to run off. So say that mark is at 3 minutes, that's when you get runoff. So you don't want to run it for any more than 3 minutes. But with a timer, what you can do is have it start at, let's say, 4 a.m., run for 3 minutes, turn off. It can have a multiple start time. So you can then, with that timer, set it to come on again at 5 a.m., run it for 3 minutes, and then at 6 a.m. So you're running the system for 9 minutes total, but you don't have any runoff. You don't have any waste. It's all absorbing because you gave that soil a chance to absorb it, soak it, and take it in and put it down 6 to 8 to 12 inches into the ground where the roots really want to use it. And that's one way to avoid runoff, and that's one way to use your pop-up sprinklers. Now, again, I mentioned an MP rotator is a new sprinkler head. What they did was they took that same sprinkler head that we were putting out 2 to 3 gallons per hour and changed it to 0.5 to 1 gallon per hour with little streams of water. And they angled these little streams to hit right in front of the sprinkler, a few feet farther out, a few feet farther out, a few feet farther out, and they just kind of move across, right? So you're always watering the area immediately near the sprinkler. But because it's only putting out 1 gallon per hour, that you can run it for 3 times as long without the runoff. So now you're back to being able to run it for 9 minutes, but you have 0 runoff because you're giving a chance for the soil to absorb it. You're not bombing. You're not taking a bucket and dumping it in the soil. You're just taking that bucket and slowly tipping it to make sure it soaks in there.
And I think something else that you referred to within this conversation is you can have it go on for a certain amount of time, off and back on again. I think consistency is just as important as what you're talking about in terms of every day at a certain time or twice a day or whatever. You're going to get the same amount of water at the same time each day. So I guess the plants would almost kind of get used to like when they're going to be watered in that sense, right?
Yeah,
you're consistent. You're not watering at 10 o'clock one day, 9:30 the next day, 8 o'clock, whatever.
Well, I mean, if you change it, you run the risk of...
What's going on? He's late with the water today. Where is it?
Like
Hey,
your
guys.
pet, like your pet. If does
I look
your
at
pet
plants
just
like
brings
that.
brings the food bowl to you at 5 p.m. I mean, the one thing that you want to be careful with that is, if you're in an area where you have, extreme weather changes and you water in the early morning one day and then you change it, you have the air of maybe having a period of time where they can dry out.
Yeah.
Or if you shorten it, you could be over watering kind of a thing. But all of that changes with the weather. I mean, we talk about the weather is a dominant force whenever we're talking about plants and how they grow. That, with winter hours, it might be a little cooler, but the big thing is that water stays in the ground in the winter more simply because there's more nighttime. There's less evaporation.
And it's more cool. It's cool.
Well, it is
for a
cooler,
longer period of time.
But I mean, even us, John talks about it being 90 next week. Well, even though it's 90 next week, it's not like it's 90 in the summertime, because that 90 in the summertime is for 6 hours out of the day. The 90 next week is only going to be for 1 hour during the day. Right. So you still water less in the wintertime, even though it's still 90. Santa Ana's a different story,
that's
John.
That's going to dry everything out.
That's going to dry everything out.
And then John's going to come back with allergies next
Yeah.
weekend.
Yeah, wind is more drying than heat sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
But speaking of wind and pop-up sprinklers, they're one of its biggest enemies. The idea behind pop-up sprinklers is to shoot water in the air and have it fall onto the landscape where you want it to go. So that's why you don't run a pop-up sprinkler ever in the middle part of the day, because you're wasting water. Not only is it evaporating as soon as it leaves the sprinkler head and goes into the air, but the wind just takes it wherever the wind pushes that water,
to your next
right?
door neighbor.
It does,
Water.
right? You can have a sprinkler and it's watering 3 feet away because
Yeah.
the wind is blowing it.
You know, it's interesting. Where I live in our complex is they have sprinklers along, the sides next to the parking lot, so on and so forth. And every time I park in this certain area, my car gets all the sprinkler runoff. And because of all the salts and calcium, it sticks to your car. Their sprinklers need to be adjusted. I should let them know that, your sprinklers, you're watering the parking lot.
Yeah.
You're not watering as much of the landscape as you think you are.
Yeah. And so
your point is well taken.
And so, you want to water before the wind and before sunrise because you want it to absorb. You want it to soak into the ground. So that's why we tell people start it at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., whatever early. Some people have problems because, their irrigation system, when it turns on, if they have an old house, it goes
Makes
clunk,
noise.
clunk, 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 wakes you up. You don't want it running at 2 a.m. if it wakes you up. But if you can, John's kind of debunked the idea of watering overnight where it causes mildew and stuff. Like a lot of plants can tolerate that. There are a few that are prone to disease that you want to watch out for. But I mean, plants have been in nature for a long time and they get watered whenever they get watered. And as long as you allow them to dry out and you don't create a great environment for fungus, water it at midnight, 1 a.m., water it at 10 p.m. so it soaks. People say lawns, don't water them at night because they get fungal issues. In California, there's no fungal issues for lawns. I mean, back east, different story.
Not many, but even back east, we would say if you water at 3 o'clock in the morning because of the dew, the relative humidity between the top of the grass blade and the soil is 100%.
Yeah.
Doesn't make any difference how much water you put on. It's not going to go over 100%. So actually watering at night would eliminate some fungal issues because when the sun comes out, they dry up.
Mm-hmm.
If you had your lawn or water going on in the morning when the sun came out, you'd be extending the period of the 100% humidity.
Yeah, where it would normally dry out by 7 a.m., now you're extending it to 9, 10 a.m., and there's more problem, right? You're saying?
Yeah.
So, you don't want to have, roses watered at, 6 p.m. in the afternoon and then have, water on their foliage for the next 12 hours. But, there's a lot of plants like lawns that you can water at night. And then, by doing that, say you did water at midnight for a lawn.
All right.
That means that the water is staying there for the next 8 to 10 hours.
At least until the sun comes up and dries out.
And soaking it up and soaking it into the ground. So that way those roots drive down into the soil. They get 10 to 12 to 14 inches deep. Well, when roots are that deep, you get a better, stronger plant because there's less problem for air. Because meaning, say there is that hot, dry day and they've got 14 inches of root. That's more what I like to call like mouth that feeds that plant versus a lawn that only has 6 inches of root and there's that hot, dry day. Well, it within 6 inches, it sucked up all the moisture. There's nothing else it can grab,
But the deeper you have it, the better.
Yeah. And, for all plants, the deeper roots growth, the bigger root system that you can create, you get great things like fungi, like mycorrhiza and things like that are going to just benefit it all in all. So pop-up sprinklers, I really like to use over drip and over micro sprayers because they wash the plant off, they soak the ground, they create a good environment. So, part of, soil nutrients, part of soil health is life. Well, in order for soil to have life, it has to have water, right? So, if you have a drip system and you're only watering these specific areas, those other parts of the yard,
right?
There's still life, don't get me wrong.
But
because
you're talking about underground biology, right?
Yeah, but there's not as much life as if the whole area was at least taken care of, And so, I like pop-up. And then not only that, it waters in fertilizers. I like the idea that it waters in the fertilizer as well.
On pop-up sprinklers, you can buy them with different size bodies, like a 2-inch, a 3-inch, 4-inch.
Yeah.
What's the difference? Why would you use one over another?
So it's the height. So we talked about drift and wind.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a 2-inch sprinkler only pops up a few inches and then shoots water. So it's perfect for a real low lawn, right? Nothing that's going to obstruct it. You need an unobstructed view from the sprinkler,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're using an MP rotator or whether you're using just a standard head. You want that view to be unobstructed so it shoots and it stays low. The lower you can get it to the ground, the most efficient you can be. Well, if you have a flower bed and you got a lissome along the edge, that grows 6 inches. If you had to put a 2-inch sprinkler there, it's going to hit the alyssum and then not water anything behind it, right? So that's where you need that 6-inch sprinkler to jump up over the alyssum,
Okay, yeah.
start hitting all of the plants or the lawn or whatever it is behind it. And, you know, some people have, you know, we've gone to those I forget, long borders, you know, in England where you had these massive plantings where flowers are, you know, 12, 14 inches tall. And if you put 6-inch sprinklers, they wouldn't water anywhere either. So you put a 12-inch sprinkler, a 14-inch sprinkler to water up over that long border and water all the flowers in there as well. So, you know, but you wouldn't want to put a 12-inch sprinkler in your lawn because you're raising that sprinkler 12 inches over the grass. Now it's shooting out and it completely misses all the lawn around it. And I will say in sprinkler design, the sprinkler that is in its location isn't the sprinkler watering the lawn directly in front of it. So meaning where you have a sprinkler, those plants, those flowers, that lawn are not getting watered by that sprinkler. A sprinkler design is supposed to be overlapping. So the sprinkler next to it or across from it is the sprinkler that's actually supposed to be watering that sprinkler's area.
No, that makes sense.
It's kind of hard to
because
explain over
it's
the radio.
It's up high and it's going on all sides away. In other words, the plants directly underneath the sprinkler
aren't getting
not
watered
getting
by
it
that
because
sprinkler.
it's going over them to other plants.
Yeah, but the other sprinkler
Comes
across
back.
from it or
Right.
next to it
Right.
are the sprinklers that are supposed to be watering.
No, I've got a good visual.
So you
that makes
shouldn't,
sense.
you know, if you've got your sprinklers 20 feet away, they're not watering properly unless you have heads that can hit 20 feet. You know, if your heads are 10 feet heads,
Mm-hmm.
you need to be putting those, you know, sprinklers 10 feet away from each other so they're overlapping each other kind of a thing.
Right. No, that makes sense.
So on the pop-up, if it's a 12-foot sprinkler, does that mean you actually put them every 12 feet?
Correct.
You don't
Yeah.
have to
The
go
head. Yeah.
10 feet so they overlap. They're going to overlap at 12 feet.
They're going to overlap at 12. Now, you
Got it.
sometimes adjust down because sometimes you have one side that goes 12 feet, and then on the other side, you've got a turn in your sidewalk or something. It only goes 10 feet. So you adjusted your sprinkler down so you're not hitting the sidewalk, right? Well, that just means that you don't get the chance to put that other sprinkler 12 feet away. You have to put it 10 because you shrunk the sprinkler down, you know? So in sprinkler design, there's the layout, there's pressure. That is one thing, too, to consider with pop-up sprinklers is there's a maximum number of sprinklers you can put on a line. You get a lot more leeway with drip and Netafim. Like I was saying, you can go 500 feet and not worry about pressure loss. Well, with pop-up sprinklers, you put 10 sprinklers on one line, and I don't care if you're working with 1 inch all the way down to ½ inch, 10 to 12 sprinklers, you've kind of maxed out the system. You can't put a lot more than that. There's so much pressure required to turn on the system that you really need to be careful as far as you can't just keep adding sprinklers and expect it to work the same.
So you need a different valve if you're
Different
once
zone.
you've hit 10 sprinklers, you need a different valve.
Exactly.
And let's talk about soil too, especially when it comes to slopes. Because if you've got hard soil, you're not going to get the soaking that you want. So you can have the best sprinkler system in the world, but what about the soil in terms of being able to take in that much water, Tiger?
Yeah, and that's
especially
where
on a slope.
You know, that's where you look at like a benefit would be kind of number one, organic fertilizers, because again, like we're talking about, they take care of the soil, not just the plants. Number two, using like the Natural Guard Humate product, which is a concentrated soil conditioner. It's granular form that you just put down in the soil that helps, break up clays, helps better absorption, helps create an environment for the mycorrhizae, for the roots to grow and earthworms to grow and all that fun stuff. So, taking care of the soil is very important. And especially like you mentioned, your car issue with the sprinklers.
Right, yeah.
In cities where our irrigation system is ran through our city water.
Yeah.
The water is not spring water. That water is filtered. It's been treated. You've got chemicals in it. You have chlorines in it. That you need to. All of those things kill those wonderful soil-borne funguses and all those excellent things in your soil. So, it's really important that you take care of the soil with an
Yeah.
organic fertilizer, a humate product, so that way you just re-energize it every so often to make sure you have good absorption like you're talking about.
So, John, are you still up in the air on what you're going to put in as far as your irrigation or sprinklers? I want to know what he's going to do.
He's got to build his house first.
Yeah.
I think I'm in my situation. Because I have so much property to cover, it'll be a combination.
Yeah.
See, that makes sense.
And
I'll
it
need
works.
pop-ups in some
Yeah.
areas. I'll need
Yeah.
drip in other areas.
Depending upon what you've got planted and what you're watering.
Exactly.
And it changes with time. I mean, like I just said, initially a bed, you might put 6-inch pop-ups in it. But as that bed grows, as that bed develops, you might have to change it to an 8 or 10-inch pop-up
sure.
because the plants have grown and they need to be changed. The other thing is maintenance of the beds in terms of when you have plants growing all the way to the edge of your bed and swallowing up sprinklers, that plant needs to be moved. It needs to be put back. It needs to be trimmed. So that way your sprinklers can work, because people don't realize it. They go, oh, this plant has been in my bed for 3 years and it's dying now. What changed? Well, turn on your sprinkler system.
Yeah.
Well, this sprinkler's getting blocked by this plant now.
Yep.
This one's getting
Yep.
blocked by this plant.
Yeah.
And that plant that's dying is not getting any water.
Not getting any water at all. So it's I would say low key maintenance.
Yes.
It's maintenance, but it's a slow maintenance because as time goes by, plants get bigger. You adjust the height.
It creeps up on you, right?
Yeah.
Because plants, unlike these microgreens that are ready to go in a week, we're talking a landscape evolves over years.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, you walk out there, why is this happening? Oh, the sprinkler system I put in 3 years ago doesn't match what I have now.
Sure.
And so you change it up. So, I will give a disclaimer, though, for people, whoever you are, wherever you are. If you have questions about sprinklers, go to a local irrigation supply store. They're not always the friendliest, because they're designed for more landscape gardeners, professionals. That's who they're dealing with. People like me that can walk into their store and say exactly what they want, when they want it, how they want it. Yeah. They're not always geared to a homeowner that has a problem.
And answering a lot of questions.
I will give you that disclaimer right now, but you are going to get the best and the correct info. Box stores never have the right product, and getting the info is very hit and miss.
Well, they're not. They're not trained. They're trained so far.
If you walk into an irrigation supply store, it is a warehouse with parts for every possible scenario. Mm-hmm. You walk into a box store, they have a half an aisle dedicated to these, and they have a lot of parts that that do general, but do not always solve a problem. And so, if you have a question, go to an irrigation supply store. Be patient with them. Be prepared to, get a couple eye rolls,
and maybe
but you'll get your answer.
Explain to them beforehand. Look, I know you deal with big companies and nurseries.
Yeah.
I'm just the guy down the street. I really need your help.
Yes, and they'll help. They'll
know.
Yeah.
Oh, he gets it. He knows what we're about.
Yeah.
We don't normally do this, but we're glad to help you.
Yeah.
What about if you went to an independent garden center? Would you go in and just say, do you have anyone here that specializes in irrigation?
That is a great way to do it as well. They might not sell the product, but they'll give you the info. And they're much more inclined to sit down with you and walk you through it. I mean, many a times we don't sell irrigation parts at the nursery, but I've sat down with people and laid out how they should install it or what they should do.
Point them in the right direction.
So when they go to that irrigation supply store, they say, hey, here's what I'm looking for. And at least they got a roadmap to get started.
Come prepared, basically.
And usually if they're putting in irrigation, they're going to have to put in plants.
Yep.
That's why they're putting in the irrigation. So if you help them out in the irrigation, they'll come back to you for the plants.
For the plants, exactly.
Absolutely.
So yeah, lots of good info. If you guys on the podcast have questions, go to our Facebook page, send us a picture with a problem, send us a picture, or send us a question on our Facebook page. If you're watching this on our YouTube channel, or if you're watching this on our Facebook Live, send us a direct message, and we love to answer our listeners, our watchers' questions, and it comes to these, because there's a lot of questions out there, and there's a lot of products out there when it comes to irrigation that people don't quite know exactly how to use it or what to watch out for.
Right. Is that about it for today in terms of information? John, I learned something. John learned something.
So round 3, we'll be talking about the valves and the clocks. So
valves and clocks.
We covered drip system. We covered soaker, netafim systems, how to use them. We talked about pop-up sprinklers. Now, how do all of those parts turn on?
So that's where I get confused.
And
valves and clocks and
Right.
timers. Just
okay.
I think I'm going to listen in next week.
Yeah, that's great advice. Hey, thank you so much for tuning into this podcast. We'll do it again next week, as Tiger mentioned, part 3, as we talk about sprinklers, drip irrigations, pop-ups, timers, so on and so forth. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, our YouTube channel, or Facebook, we do appreciate it. Everything is posted right there on our YouTube channel. Until our next podcast, which will be next week or next time, Brian Main, John Bagnasco, Tiger Palafox, thank you for tuning into this podcast of Garden America. Take care.